Welcome to the sale room of KÖNIG GALERIE St. Agnes. I'm Johann König and I'll give you a tour through the sale room. We decided to present a selection of works in sort of small solo presentations, and we begin here to the left with Anzemo Island. He is a German artist, born 1970, lives and works in Berlin. He's teaching painting at the HFBK in Hamburg. He is a conceptual artist who works with painting, sculpture, installation. Very characteristic for his practice is the use of found objects. For example, to the left side, we see the tri-stand from his studio, and it has stains on it from the production of paintings which he turned into a bar. It's a limited edition, and on the back, the work on paper. These are watercolors of his earlier quite famous foil paintings. Sort of a new highlight is the painting here, Orange and Green on Burlow. He creates these two elements, very strong composition. It has this remembrance of glue which is used on construction site. Also here the vase, which refers to sort of an 80s phenomena of lava lamps, which are sort of considered kitsch or bad taste. The space we are in is a former church. Here used to be the nave, and you see the concrete pillars are holding the base plate. We call a table because the concrete plate is lying on these pillars which have no foundation below. So they are just freestanding in the space because the listed building authorities did not let us install fundaments. Right on, we see ELMGREEN and DRAGSET, which is an artist duo from Norway and from Denmark. They are addressing often issues of inequality. So, for example, the sculpture is referring to the symbol of Copenhagen, a mermaid, but here you see a male mermaid, and also deals with gender questions and queerness. And they are pretty much active between art and architecture. Here to the left, Japanese artist Shiaro Shiota. This is a work on canvas. Shiaro is working and living in Berlin. She is born in 1972 in Osaka. These are red strings in nets, so they are like thousands of knots connected. And in her work, she addresses the fundamental issues of human being, like life, death, relationship, and this very philosophical question of our current present existence. And she works in giant immersive installations, again with string, or also these canvases where you have these thousands of woven nets connected. To the right, we see RINUS van der Velde, is a Belgian artist, and here we see a selection of works on canvas and on paper. RINUS is born in 1983 in Leuven and lives and works in Antwerp. His large-scale coal works on paper or on canvas are often suggesting a certain narrative and have filled interiors and refer also to our collective image archive. And he creates a new context for existing protagonists, or he sort of invents and has his avatars being in his scenographic images, and juxtaposes these images with text underneath. On the left side is Andreas Schmidten, is a German artist who's coming from Düsseldorf and is very much in the tradition also of Düsseldorf sculpture, I would say. And here you see these vitrines he's most known for are sort of three-dimensional sculptures. He puts this distance in form of a glass between the viewer and the object. Often the figure is missing. It's sort of present, but you don't see it. And then he introduced the figure with these large scale and smaller drawings, which are sort of manuals of how to use certain objects, and they appear quite of brutal, but are very emotionless, I would say. Alicia KWADE also works and lives in Berlin, born 1979 at Katowice, is a conceptual artist exploring and researching questions of our structural existence and the systems we live in, time, space, the value of money, the conditions of material. And here to the left, we see a work which is combined of several elements from her studio. 3 elements which are all of different materials, so stone, granite, wood, and glass, but they seem to be all under the same condition. So because they're all kind of melted. To the right, these are arm clocks and one exact month. Here on the right side, it's a meter, but cut up to a smaller scale. So as you can see, she plays with different realities. So she's sculpting the conditions we live under, like what's time, how do you define, plays also with this idea of the Mars we see down here, which is a marshmallow. This myth also of that the Mars might be green, which is not the case, of course. And here also the parallel world, what she calls, you see the stone and the bronze copy. So as if there is a different reality behind the mirror and sort of a parallel world that this stone might exist again in a different material. Continuing her concept of the 2 stones in the mirror, you see also here the branch. So these are 2 bronze casts of tree branches, which are mirrored again, but physically mirrored. And so she scanned one branch, printed it, made a mold, casted it, and flipped that scan digitally and made the same. And in the middle you have this sphere, which almost functions like a mirror. She continues this idea of the parallel world in this case also. On the left side we see Michael SAILSTORFER, who is clearly a sculptor. These are in fact lead paintings. So he ordered these sheets of lead in a construction supply, and then he painted on them with eyeliner. So in fact these are, if I remember correctly, MAC Cosmetic eyeliner. Michael is also living and working in Berlin, as many other artists from us as well. He's born in 1979, and in his sculptures and installations he juxtaposes often the different contexts of his practice. So in this case here, lead plus eyeliner, which of course are on one side very harsh and on the other sort of like soft materials, which have the purpose to, on one side, be sealing off buildings or protect them from wind and water, and on the other side to sort of change our appearance and make us look better. So it's a very interesting combination. Small honorable mention to the right side for Robert Janetz, is a German painter living in Mexico City. He's pretty much an abstract painter who combines oil, wax, and flour, which I think is his unique technique. I loved his reference once that he said painting is like buttering toast. He creates these amazing immersive surfaces and looks like this giant brushstroke movement, and the flour he mixes in his paints create an amazing effect. Moving forward, we see Friedrich Kunarth, who's a German artist living and working in Los Angeles, and is between German Romantic and American West Coast pop culture. He often works with texts which are sort of related to song texts and sort of concrete poetry. It's all always sort of sunshine and noir where he's active in. He's working with all medias, from painting to drawing to sculpture, and is not really bound to any specific genre. Creates really strong emotions of loneliness, sorrowness, euphoria. So this painting on the left side refers to midlife crisis, and the other one to a certain romantic nostalgia. Here also you see these 2 chairs. I would say that it's about human relationships and wrong expectations and projections, and it's often very humorous, but also there's often a certain light, full heaviness, if that makes any sense. He was born 1974 in Chemnitz, which then was titled Karl-Marx-Stadt, which used to be a town in the GDR. So he grew up in socialist Germany. Somehow, I think that his work is deeply influenced by that, because it was, I think, like kind of a dream situation for children, but at the same time it was clear that something's wrong with that positive reality, which still kind of shine through in his dialectic practice, also between like Germany and East German Romanticism and West Coast imaginary. To the left we see Jeppe HEIN, Danish artist living and working in Berlin, born 1974. Jeppe HEIN's sculptures and installations are sort of growing out of minimal art and often have a playful and performative element and are very interactive in the sense that they are inviting the viewer to interact or participate. So the neon piece ahead of us is a breathing. Here we see it's like breathe out and then you hold and then you breathe in again. And so it's kind of a participatory moment of coming to yourself. And for example, he works with these quotes, sometimes in neon, don't expect anything, be open to everything. So often has these mantra elements. And this red bench we see here to the left is a social bench. So it invites people to interact. So he irritates with our normal perception we would have. To the left, we see a flying cube, which is playing with this geometry of minimal art, but also this fascination of the human surprise, maybe. Also here, the balloons, which are hanging at the ceiling, which of course can't be because they're metallic. So he really tries to entertain and put a smile on visitors' faces. On the right side is Jorinde Vogt. She is born 1977 in Frankfurt, lives and works in Berlin as well. And her graphical works on paper are very much derived from spending time and thinking about music, philosophy. And she's sort of building her own systems, which are combined of her own physical and mental experiences, transfer into a creation of her work on paper. And she has her own sort of language of elements which are repeatedly appearing, and also she's constantly adding new elements to. Opposite Jorinde Vogt, we see CLAUDIA COMTE, who's an artist living and working in Switzerland and born 83 in Grancy in the pure nature. And her work, she's pretty much a sculptor, but also does paintings. And you see this painting here is like one movement. She took one big brush and made this one circle. It's sort of interesting that as a sculptor, she works a lot in wood. So this sort of shape and structure very much reminds of the rings of wood. So her work shows classical influences from op art, pop art, but also sometimes she uses elements from comic culture. On the left side, we see Camillero with her brand new paintings and bronze object. Camille is a French artist living in Berlin right now. She was awarded the Silver Lion at the Venice Biennale, and her work is dealing with issues like religion, anthropology, museology, and literature, and of course her own experiences, psychoanalysis, doubting, and wondering about our society systems. Right now she's very much busy with parenthood and motherhood and the role of mothers, which you also can sort of identify in the paintings. I would say that this animal, the bronze animal, is somehow in fatigue. Also she's researching in her work about the fatigueness of our society. The two boys to the right are by Norbert Bisky, who was born 1970 in Leipzig. and is working between Berlin and Andalusia. He is a painter who studied in Berlin under Georg Baselitz and is quite known for his figurative paintings. This is an earlier work here. It shows two young male guys, sort of from their style, assumingly part of the GDR organization for young socialists, and they have seem to look into the West eventually. Norbert is a painter who transfers into his work his own experience of terror, travels through Brazil, also images he finds in the media landscape. He grew up in East Germany. His father was a renowned lefty politician, and then he also witnessed one of the most respected figurative painters in Germany. His works are also in the Museum of Modern Art collection in New York. Matthias Weischer, a painter working and living in Leipzig, considered as one of the most important artists of the Leipzig new Leipzig school movement. If you would be here with me now, you would smell the paint. It's really interesting how strong the work is still present in that sense. Although Matthias Weischer is considered as one of the most important artists from the Leipzig school, he was born 1973 in Elte in Westfalen near Münster. And he was, I would say, 20 when he was included in the first Venice Biennale. And back then he got sort of famous for his empty rooms, which you also see here. It's also a lot of painting references, like pictures within the picture, which is a highlight I love in his work. And he works with interior elements, like here down, where he painted the carpet, and plays with the fascination of light. And again, this signature elements of his empty rooms are really an interesting experience. I hope they somehow transfer here in that online tour. Worth mentioning are these elements of interior elements like the lamp, the clock, how he plays with decor and light and architecture. Amalia Pica, 1987, is an Argentinian artist who's living in London. And in her work, she's pretty much dealing about communication and the mechanism of communication. In this particular series here, she refers to office tables and the works on paper dealing with her denial of becoming a British citizen, and her sort of Kafkaesque way of going through these protocols of applying for citizenship. At the time, Great Britain was still in the European Union. Once she managed, they left the European Union, so it's kind of a weird Sisyphus sort of moment. And with her tables and objects here, she refers to the idea of the office as a social space, and the colors are also related to Argentinian and South American art history. And here she plays different models through how these tables might be arranged and then shape a geometric form. And the paperworks, Joy of Paperwork here, were created using usual elements from office supplies and stamps and all type of elements which are sort of ready-made found objects from bureaucratic needs. So here to the left we see Douglas Gordon. It's a Scottish artist who's living in Glasgow and Berlin. He's born in the late 60s. Most of Douglas' work is seen as being about memory, and he's using repetition in various forms. The two hands here on the left side are repeating element. In this case, it's a bronze cast, and are his own hands. And also in the picture, you see his hands holding a candle and the wax dropping down on it, which I would clearly put in context of his film element work, where he overturns traditional use of video and photography by playing with time elements. And clearly he refers to time using the element of the candle. Here again we see Jorinde Vogt. It's worth mentioning this work here in particular because it's from the immersive series. So what she does there is to build a real basin. She fills that basin with blue paint, and then she drowns the work on paper in that basin, dries it out, and then works on it again with like inlays of gold and draws on it. So it's a very sort of immersive work. It's almost like a sculpture. These plexiglass box with casted bronze bags, an installation of Tatiana TROUVÉ, and the plexiglass box is a shipping crate. So she considers them shadows of her own work, like these wood crates we know from Richard Archwager and of course from art shipping. So she refers to that and creates a transparent object tainted in green glass. The fluorescent painting is by Manfred Kuttner. Manfred Kuttner is a very interesting figure in German art history. He was working together with Gerhard Richter, Sigmar Polke, and Konrad Luke, who later became Konrad Fischer, the gallerist. He was among these group of them, and he painted in this sort of tradition of Vasarely, but also very influenced by Yves Klein, trying to make paintings which are sort of floating in front of the wall. And this work here is from the 60s. It's very interesting. If you zoom in closely, you see the drips. It's not really clear how he painted that painting because the painting movements goes in many directions. Another artist from an older generation we think is fairly underrepresented and of high relevance as a teacher but also as a painter, and his part in German art history is Karl Horst Hödecke, who we see the painting ahead. He was born 1938 in Nuremberg in Germany, just was honored with a big solo exhibition at the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich and at the Palais Populaire here in Berlin. He's considered like the godfather of the Junge Wilde, which is a neo-expressionist movement, and is also somewhat of a chronist of Berlin. He painted all his life in Berlin, when Berlin was an island, when the war came down, and also his studio looked on Potsdamer Platz, so he painted Potsdamer Platz in the making. Here to the left, recent work by Katharina Grosse, where she spray painted on wood, put together these two elements of wood in her New Zealand studio, so where she painted and started to paint on these wood panels and then included these wood panels in her practice, and they are arranged together, painted, and then she put a string on, painted over and took the string off. It's really much typical for her work to go beyond the canvas, create an immersive space, and leaving the classical shape of the usual canvas. In this case, she puts together these two elements of wood. Fully consciously, she leaves the structure of the wood visible so that you can see behind the paint the organic shape or the organic surface of the wood. So here the shoe you see on the wall, in fact it's by Tatiana TROUVÉ, who is a French-Italian artist, who has a big room right now in the new, soon-to-open Pinault Foundation Museum in Paris. And the shoe you see is made of bronze, and also the pieces of soap is an ongoing series, but in this case it's a small installation or a unique installation. It's a bronze cast of soap. And so here also the human figure plays a role, and Tatiana creates these outwardly worlds. Here to the front we see an installation made of Hermès leather. So these are sort of remains of production from Hermès. She juxtaposes and arranges to to this small handrail where the leather is lying over, and it's too small to be real. Here again you see the bronze plexiglass composition standing on bronze cast female shoes. So it's often these atmospheric installations she's creating. So this object here is by ELMGREEN and DRAGSET, as mentioned before. It's an enlarged cast of a spine, of a human spine, cast in bronze, and treated somewhat as an ancient dinosaur bone, but it's in fact from a human being, just blown up. And exactly that's where the tail would come out, or comes out in monkeys. So it's kind of what makes the difference between a human and a monkey. So now we're strolling through the sale room back to the chapel. So we call the upstairs space where Loie Hollowell is giving the tour nave, and the chapel is Jeremy Shaw Exhibitions, and he will take over from here and tell you about his work. Now we're strolling through the sale room back to the chapel. So we call the upstairs space where Loie Hollowell is giving the tour nave, and the chapel is Jeremy Shaw Exhibitions, and he will take over from here and tell you about his work.